first case before us is State versus Phillips, and Mr. Medwick, you are alone today, so you have 15 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll try not to be long.
You use up the 15 minutes however you see fit.
Thank you. This is a matter of State versus David Phillips. I represent, if it please the court, I now Medwick. I represent David Phillips, the appellant in this matter. And Mr. Phillips has raised 3 assignments of error, based in insufficiency of the evidence against manifest weight, and a challenge to photographic exhibits that were prejudicial to my client that were admitted at trial. I will stand largely on the briefs in this matter, but I did want to point out a couple of things regarding the assignments of error 1 and 2. The state has pointed to the prior ruling from this court on a co-defendant in this matter, Mr. Gray, and I wanted to take an opportunity to distinguish that case a little bit. The state indicates that Mr. Gray was less involved in this matter than my client, Mr. Phillips, and I would contend that that's not actually the case, that the evidence demonstrates that Mr. Phillips arrived separately and apart from the other defendants in this matter, including the principal actor, that he was in fact across the street at a mechanics and came over and went back and forth before being in the location at that time, unlike Mr. Gray, who I don't think who was there at the same time and who also left with the shooter when everyone departed and my client returned across the street to the mechanic shop. I think that the issue here is whether Mr. Phillips could be found complicit for felony murder when all of his involvement in the case took place after the shooting of Mr. I believe it's Wicks in this matter, that Mr. Wicks was shot and then proceeded into a struggle with the shooter, with the principal actor in this case, and Mr. Phillips then, after all of those acts, engaged he punched Mr. Wicks in the face. And at that point, that may be evidence of the felonious assault, but that was not the basis for, that's not the basis for the felony murder. That would have been an ag robbery, which would also have predated in time the act. The causation of Mr. Phillips punching Mr. Wicks is not there. That he was not previously involved. He was not actively involved at any point prior to that, and his presence there was not as a knowing accomplice at any point in that matter. As I said, these matters have been largely briefed. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just wondering that the sequence of events that Phillips, there's no dispute he punched him.
There is no dispute. We're not.
Right. That he was shot again after that.
I think there's a timeline dispute about that among the eyewitness testimony as to, I think there are 3 eyewitnesses to that shooting, and the sequence of time to whether both shots occurred prior to to Mr. Phillips' involvement, or whether one shot was fired and then Mr. Phillips punched him and then a second shot was fired after the recovery of the gun. I think that comes from one witness. but I think that evidence is in dispute. And there is no, and the record's unclear as to the, I don't think there's a beyond a reasonable doubt is the fact that it would have been that second bullet that would have been the killing shot. I don't know that evidence is in the record. I don't think you could get to beyond a reasonable doubt on that issue based on the evidence that's present. And again, as I said, without a argument back and forth here, I will rest on the briefs on most of that. I would like to address the photo issue as well, because the state raises questions, statements that these photos were relevant in some way as to stating things very broadly, that accepting it almost as a fait accompli, that the idea of association under any circumstances would be a relevant piece of evidence as to whether the mere fact of friendship or association of these guys does not figure in, doesn't change any material fact at issue. I think that they were all present, they were all there. I think the fact that they made YouTube videos in the past does not provide evidence of any criminal intent or any act or any evidence of complicity in this act on this date. That.
What do you make of the state's information, or put it that your client had signaled to Mr. Lewis, you got the wrong guy, I think. What do you make of that?
And I think that is, that's also disputed evidence in some way, and that he clearly raised his hands and shook his head. He may have been indicating don't, or, in what regard, that evidence was taken is, I think, also in dispute at the trial of that. Okay. But again, and I think back to the assignments 1 and 2, the state's position on complicity almost seems to be more of a requirement of some active refutation rather than, which would be in order to distinguish. Mr. Phillips was merely present, and up until the act of punching, and then I think that at that point the state charged him simply for being there, and I think would have liked the only way for him to have avoided that would have been to do something contrary to the act. Is more of an act, a claim of conspiracy than of complicity. That he was there with the intent to assist in these acts, and he would have needed to take some act of active reputation in order to separate himself out at that point. But back to the photos, and again, this is tied in with a claim of conspiracy as opposed to complicity. The photos all indicate that they were associates. They don't indicate that they intended to be in the same place at the same time, that Mr. Phillips was going to assist, abet, encourage this activity in any way. There were, and significantly, there were gang charges, charges of gang-related activity, which were separated out from this trial. That any indication that these photos might have been relevant to that would have been undermined by the state's, by the agreed separation and bifurcation of those gang charges. At this point, there was no support for the inclusion of those photos. They had nothing to the argument one way or the other. Given that, I would concede the balance of my time.
All right, the court will take the matter under advisement and send a copy of our opinion to you and obviously to the state as well, and you can look on our website.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.